Hello, my name's Lynn. I'm the voice behind the videos that you'll be watching for your Functional Skills English Level 2 exams. So in all the different videos I'll be taking you through some of the different strategies for the reading, the writing and the speaking and listening exam. We'll look at some of the wording of the questions, some of the things you need to do to get the maximum marks, and we'll go through some practice exam questions together. For all of the videos you may find it useful to have a piece of paper to make notes, or you can take screenshots or photographs or rewind and fast forward the videos at any point so that you can recap on something or you can find the part that's most relevant to you. So there's lots of different videos in the series. Make sure that you have a look at all the ones you think will be relevant to the exam you're doing and the things you need to practice. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video and good luck with your functional skills exams.
In this video, I'd like to talk a little bit about grammar. You'll need grammar for when you're doing your writing exam, and it will just help you to make sure that you're getting the full marks available for the writing that you're doing. We don't need to go into a lot of detail with grammar. There's not much that you need to know, but we'll just go over a few key points. So we're going to have a look at actually what we mean when we say grammar. We'll learn a few parts of speech. We'll talk about subject-verb agreement and tense. We'll look at some common grammatical mistakes and how to spot them. We'll have a look at how an examiner does some marking and some of the things they will pick up on. Before we start that, just to show you for the Edexcel, the current mark scheme in terms of the spelling, punctuation and grammar section. Now this section makes up 40% of the overall mark for writing. And if we look down at the bottom in the 5 to 6 mark category, you can see where you'll pick up the marks. Use of spelling and grammar is mostly accurate, supporting meaning most of the time. So that means that in order to get 5 to 6 marks, you need to make sure that you're making very few mistakes with grammar. So mostly accurate will allow for 1 or 2 mistakes in a piece of standard length, but any more than that will then push you down to the 3 to 4 band, which is using spelling and grammar with some accuracy. Now you'll notice that they've clustered together spelling and grammar together, which is a little bit tricky for the examiners as well as for you as people taking the exam, because it means that if you have fantastic spelling but the grammar is poor, then that will automatically drag you down to a lower band. And vice versa, if the grammar is excellent but the spelling is poor, then that will also drag you down. So if both of those are areas you need to improve, do try and improve them both equally, and do pay attention to both as you're writing, because one obviously doesn't outweigh the other for this particular mark scheme. Obviously future mark schemes, they may vary them. Some of the other exam boards do give marks for spelling and grammar separately, but at the moment Edexcel give the mark all as one. So let's talk about what grammar actually is, because when we talk about grammar, it's quite a vague thing. What we really mean is the structure and system of the language. So it's the order and the way we put together words to create the language. And it's both spoken and it's written. So you can have good or bad grammar in a written form or in a spoken form. Obviously, we're focusing on the writing because it's the writing exam that you need to be thinking about at this point in time. So you want to think about the order you decide to put together your words. So if the order doesn't sound right, if there's something strange about the order, that will lose you a grammatical point. And also the way the word is put together in terms of the endings of the word. So that's things like using tenses, so ed on the end of a word to make it past tense, or subject-verb agreement where you're adding an s to the end of a word. Those type of things, that's to do with the way you put words together. So let's go into a bit more detail. For the exam, probably there are 4 things to think about. One is subject-verb agreement, and that's a topic that can be quite difficult to actually learn and memorise. It's one of those things that native English speakers tend to do automatically. It's an area that you need to be careful of when you're proofreading, because I find sometimes I've made a mistake if I've changed a word but haven't looked at the rest of the sentence and haven't changed the other parts to match. Correct use of tense, so making sure you're consistent with your tense throughout the piece you're writing. The order of the words, so the order of the words in the sentence, does it make sense, basically? And the correct use of articles, and I'll explain what articles are later. In terms of grammar, we don't mean articles like letters, emails, newspaper articles, internet articles. We mean the grammatical definition of articles, which I'll explain a little bit more soon. There aren't many words in terms of terminology that you need to learn, but there are some I think are useful for you to know, and especially if you've got kids, you may have been practicing some of these with them for the exams and things like that, so you may already be familiar with them. So what I'd like you to do, if you've got a pen and paper, or you can do it in your head, that's fine, complete the table to describe what all of these parts of a sentence are. So what is an adjective? What is an adverb? What's an article? What's a conjunction? What's a noun? What's a preposition? What's a pronoun? And what's a verb? So if you'd like to pause the video at this point, that'll just give you a couple of moments to jot down some of your ideas. You don't have to write them down, you can just think about them. And then on the next slide, I'll go through some of the definitions. Okay, let's have a look. So an adjective is a describing word. It describes things or people. Later on when we look at nouns, we'll notice that adjectives describe nouns. If you're trying to think of an adjective, colours are good to go for because all the colours are nouns, are adjectives. So if you're describing a car, you could use the adjective blue, the blue car, to describe it. Think about size or shape, the tall tree, the short tree. Anything that describes a thing or a person or a place is an adjective. Now an adverb says here alters the meaning of the verb. I tend to say it adds to the verb, it describes the verb. So an adverb often ends in ly, not always, but a large percentage of adverbs do. And I say they tell you a bit more about the verb. So if we go down to the very bottom and look at verb, a verb is an action or a doing word. So any action is a verb. So if you're sitting down now, sitting is the verb. If you're standing, if you're walking, if you're thinking, if you're writing, reading, all of those I've used are ing endings on the verb, which is one possibility. The pure to the form of the verb is the to form. So to read, to sit, to eat, to be, to have, to like. Those are all forms of verbs. So if we go back up now and think about adverbs, we want to add more information to those verbs. So it's one way I think of it is how are you doing the verb? So if you're sitting, how are you sitting? Are you sitting comfortably? Are you sitting awkwardly? If you're walking, are you walking slowly, quickly, fast? Fast is an example of an adverb that doesn't have an ly on the end. So it adds more information, adds description to your verb. Now we come to articles. I'll mention these a couple of times. 3 different articles, a and an, are what's called the indefinite articles. And the word the is a definite article. And these particular words, these are very difficult for people who are learning English as a second language to use correctly. So it's sometimes easy for me to spot someone's writing if they're not a native English writer, because they'll either miss out the a's and an's or they'll mix up when to use a, an and the. Most of the time native English writers don't tend to find this too difficult. But unfortunately, because it's the words that we use a lot in our writing, if you are using them incorrectly, it's likely to lose you a lot of marks on the paper, because you'll probably end up trying to use 30 or 40 of them, or should be using about 30 or 40 in a piece of writing. So obviously not using them is a lot of marks down the drain. Next thing down is a conjunction, sometimes called a connective. And what that does is it joins your words or sentences together. So the straightforward conjunctions are words like and, so, but, or. You've got fancy ones like therefore, although, however. So they're good words to use in your sentences, and you can differentiate yourself as a level 2 student by using some of the more complex ones. So like therefore, although, however. Next we come down to a noun. We're going to look at the noun in a bit more detail in a second. The way I remember a noun is it's the name of a person, place or thing. So a noun is a naming word for a person, place or thing. Then we come to a preposition, and I remember preposition has to do with position of something in relation to something else. So you might be on the chair, in the fridge, under the table, by the seaside. So those are the key position words. They tell you the position of something. Could be the position in time as well as the physical position. Next is the pronoun, and the pronoun is used instead of a noun, and it avoids repetition. So examples of pronouns are words like he or she or I or they. So instead of saying Tom was writing a letter, Tom was sitting down to write his letter, you might say Tom was writing a letter, he was sitting down, he lost his pen. So we're using he there instead of the name Tom. So it's words you use instead of the noun. Once you've already named something once, you don't just keep using the name over and over. You use pronouns instead. And then finally, we mentioned verb earlier, those action or doing words. So those are all the main parts of speech. I think if you know what those are, that's all the basic grammar that you need to be able to write successfully. Of course, there are hundreds and hundreds more grammatical terms you can learn. And at school at the minute, they are learning a lot of terminology at quite a young age. So if you do have kids at school, it is probably worth learning a lot more than this so that you can support them. Wanted to look a little bit more in detail at some different types of nouns now. This is another question for you to have a think about. Do you know what these different types of nouns are? So can you define them and give me some examples of them? If you'd like to pause and jot down a few ideas at this stage, that would be great. And join in again once you're ready. Okay, so we're going to have a look at these 4 different types of nouns. I've got a little table here to show you. So we talked about nouns before as being names of people, places and things. We can go a bit deeper than that. So we can talk about proper nouns. So proper nouns are individual names of people, places and things. So that includes actual people's names, names of companies, names of specific individual buildings, and anything else that comes into that category. You can always recognise a proper noun because it has to start with a capital letter wherever it's positioned in the sentence. So if we look over here on the right, we can see a few examples. Buckingham Palace, that's an individual place name. Asda, again an individual place. Sam and Mr. Hussein, individual names. So anything that is an individual name has to have a capital letter and it's a proper noun. If we look down at our next box, common nouns, also names of people, places and things, but these are the more general names of the people, places and things. So not their individual names, but the general names. One thing I always say to people to help them work out what nouns are, if you can point at it, then it's a noun. So if we look over here on the right, here are all our examples. So brother, mum, woman, manager, dog. And all of those would of course have individual names that would be proper nouns. So Sam might be the name of your brother. Mr. Hussein might be the name of your manager. Then individual buildings we looked at, like Buckingham Palace. When they're common nouns, they're just the general name for the building or the place. So bank, hospital, school, chemist, park. You only need to use the capital when you're giving the full name. So if we're talking about just normal hospital, I'm going for an appointment at the hospital, it would use a small h, it would just be a common noun. If you're going for an appointment at the Royal Hospital, and that's its individual name, then you would use a capital for all those parts. And then you've just got the common everyday things, so table, car, motorway, chair, pen, pencil, anything else you can point at. If you look around the room you're in now, everything you can see in that room is a noun. Then we come down to abstract nouns. These are a bit more difficult because these are the feelings, ideas, or qualities. So they're still things in a way, but they're not things we can point at, they're feelings. So examples will be calm, confidence, fear, love, freedom. They can all be things. And if they can be a thing, then they're an abstract noun. But if they're not a thing we can point at, that's what puts them into that category. And the final one is collective nouns. People always struggle to think of these, and then once they get going, they can normally do a few. So a collective noun is a special name for a group of other nouns. So it's a name that someone's come up with for that group. So for example, a herd of cows. So the word herd is the collective noun for a group of cows. A class or a team, to do with people. A flock of sheep. And then you've got all those fancy ones that you've probably seen on quiz shows or on the internet, things like a parliament of owls. So lots of kind of really fancy ones that you can get. Not to worry about too much. It's unlikely that you'll end up writing about those in your exam. It is quite useful to know about collective nouns when we see later how to use them with subject-verb agreement. So that's all the different types of nouns. Well done if you managed to get a couple of examples for each of those. Moving on to have a look at tense. So if you're learning English, if your English isn't a first language, you'll have learned all sorts of fancy different sorts of tense. For the purposes of this exam, really you only have to think about past, present and future in your head. Obviously, if you're learning English, you'll probably need to know those other fancy terms just to help you construct your sentences correctly. If you're a native English speaker, you just need to decide which one you're writing in. So is your article going to be in the past, in the present, in the future, and then just stick with that. And then when you do your proofreading, check that you haven't mixed up the tense as you're writing. That's really all there is to it. So if you have a look here, can we see the mistakes that are made? I go to the shop and bought milk. So go is now, happening now, but bought is past. So we've got that mix up there. It has been very hot weather for months. Is current, but been implies the past. He has returned from university yesterday. We could say he has returned from university, but by putting a definite time frame on, yesterday, means you can't use the has form. You would just say he returned from university yesterday. So the has and a definite time period don't work together. Same in this one. We have received all of the parts on Tuesday. You could say we have received all of the parts, or you could say we received all of the parts on Tuesday, but the have and the specific date of Tuesday don't match. I am working at Tesco for 3 years. And again, it's this am. The am and the time frame 3 years don't match up together. I am working at Tesco means you're doing it now. For 3 years puts a past time frame on it. So in this case, you'd say, I have worked at Tesco for 3 years, or I have been working at Tesco for 3 years. So you can see how tenses can be quite complicated. Take a bit deeper look at articles. So I mentioned articles are a, an, and the. The is the definite article. And that's because when you use the word the, you're talking about something definite. So if I'm talking about the pencil, I'm thinking of a particular pencil. I'm not just talking about any old pencil. There is a pencil I either have in my mind or a pencil I'm looking at, and that is the only one. So I'm talking about the shop. So if I'm going to the shop, I'm talking about just one specific shop that I'm going to. I'm not going to lots of different ones, I'm going to one specific one. So we use the when we're talking about specific or particular nouns. So we use the when everyone who's in the conversation will know which noun is being referred to. So sometimes you'll use the full words in the first part of the sentence and then use the afterwards when people know what you're referring to. A and an, they used to talk about nouns in general. So when we don't need to talk about a specific or particular one. So instead of asking, can you pass me the pen? And I mean one particular pen, I'd say, can you pass me a pen? And that means any old pen you can find, I don't care. The little rules about using them, you use an in front of words that begin with a vowel. So John ate an apple for lunch. Apple starts with a vowel, so you need an in front of it. I need an egg to make this cake. Egg starts with an E, so we need an in front of it. It was an exciting opportunity. Again, we're using an in front of a vowel. You use a, then opposite, in front of words that begin with a consonant. He wanted to buy a new suit. They went to a theme park. Can you pick up a pint of milk on the way home? In English, there's always an exception to every rule. The exception here, words that begin with a U or an H. They can alternate. So it's an if your noun has a vowel sound, and a if the noun sounds a bit like a consonant. So you'd say an umbrella and an air, but you'd say a university and a house. And actually, if we try to say it the other way, there's something a little odd. If you say, do you have a umbrella? Did you go to an university? It doesn't sound right. And I think it's because of how we pronounce and put the emphasis on different words there. It doesn't. So if we actually said it out loud, we would recognise that it wasn't correct. So just be aware of a couple of examples with U and H. If you're writing them, you're not sure, just say it out loud to yourself and hopefully you'll be able to tell if it's correct or not. So one of the big mistakes people make on the exam, as I mentioned, is subject-verb agreement. So to do this, we need to remember what a verb is, we need to know what a subject is, and we need to know how they agree. And we need to be careful here with the definition of a subject, because subject in general just means topic, but subject in English grammar is a bit more specific. So we'll start just by looking at verbs, remembering from before verbs are action words. And absolutely every sentence in the world has to have a verb in it for it to be a correct sentence. It can have more than one verb. So in our first example here, I go walking every Sunday. Both go and walking are verbs. Peter wrote a letter. Wrote is the verb, it's the action. You've got to have an action in every sentence. If we then go on and look at the subject in grammar is the person, place or thing. If you remember, that's the noun, so it's the noun that does the action of the sentence. So the subject is the noun that carries out the verb. So I go walking every Sunday. I is the noun, the person that's doing the action we highlighted earlier of go walking. So who does the go walking? I. In the second one, wrote was our verb. Who does that action? Who does the writing? Peter. And in the majority of sentences, you'll find that the subject is at the very beginning of the sentence. And that's because most sentences that we use day to day are active sentences. In a passive sentence, you may find that this is not the case. So that's something to have a further look at if you're interested in learning more about active and passive. So what is subject-verb agreement? This is where our subject, our person, or place or thing, has to match with the correct form of the verb. So you may know, or you may, especially if you've learnt another language, that verbs can have different forms. So I've done all the different, or some of the different forms here for you, just to show you. So the verb is love, but we can have love or loves, and they're the different forms of that verb. Obviously, then if we want to change it into the past, we can have loved, we can have loving, and so on. But we're just focusing at the minute just on the love and loves. Now, if we use the subject John, John loves cats, we use the S on the end. If we use the pronoun he instead of John, it's the same, John loves cats. But then if we use either I, we, or they at the start, then the loves changes to love. I love cats, we love cats, they love cats. And again, for native English speakers, it's easy to hear that if you said I loves cats, it wouldn't sound correct. We loves cats doesn't sound correct. But if you're learning English for the first time, that can be quite tricky. So sometimes you'll find people when they learn English or another language will learn all the different form of each verb for each possible scenario for the subject. So either a name or he, she, it, they, we, I. And then another example here, I've done the verb wear. So we have wear or wears. So I wear a uniform to work, but he wears, she wears, they wear, we wear. So a lot of verbs, take this simple form. So we have either no S or with an S. There are some more complicated ones that change completely, but just to give you the idea of how to use it in a basic way. This is basic subject-verb agreement. So we would say in the sentences written here, all of the subjects and verbs are in agreement. They're all correctly positioned. A couple of things to watch out for. If you've got two people as your subject, then you need to use the plural form of the verb. So Alison and Zeph walk to work. So Alison and Zeph is the same as using the pronoun they. So we use the form of the verb that goes with they. If you're just talking about Alison on her own, one person, Alison walks, Zeph walks, but together they walk. This next one can be a bit confusing too. Or means there's actually only one subject. So Tony or Guy is going to be the new manager, because effectively that's two sentences in one. It's Tony is going to be the new manager, or Guy is going to be the new manager. It's not they are going to be the new managers. It doesn't make sense. So it's Tony or Guy is. So if you've got an or between two people, you use the single form of the verb. So in this case, is instead of are. A couple more to watch out for. If you're using a word at the beginning of the sentence that gives a number, so one of the boxes is open, although technically you might think the subject is boxes, plural, because it's one of the boxes, we still use the singular form, is one of the boxes is. In the second sentence, those that have looked at the parts on using commas and how to construct sentences will note that the part in the commas can be taken away and the rest of it read separately. So we'd read it as the house is up for sale. That means that this verb is has to agree with the house Nothing to do with the contents. This one isn't an and as such because the and is in the commas. If it wasn't, then you would treat it as a plural and you would say are instead of is. That's just a couple of sneaky ones that can catch anybody out. Collective nouns, as we mentioned earlier, I said that we'd come back to them. This one I find quite difficult myself. Collective nouns should be treated as singular. So the team is going to win. So thinking of the team as one unit rather than made up of lots of people. So some people would say the team are going to win, treating it as plural. But it is most correct to use it as a singular form. The class is going on a field trip rather than the class are going on a field trip. So that one I think is a bit more difficult to use, and I think if you're speaking it doesn't matter, and a lot of the times in the examiner perhaps wouldn't notice, but that is strictly the best form to use. A lot of people don't realise the words is, am and are, as I've been using them, are verbs. So I've been highlighting the last few, and some people are sometimes surprised that they're verbs because they can't picture the action, but they're all part of the exact action to exist. So you still need to make sure that the words is, am and are match with your subject. He is going to be late, she is, but I am. So the form for I is am, they are, we are, it is. So he, she, it will all use the is. I will use am, and they and we will use are. A little activity for you to have a go at now. So there's an article on the next page. I'd like you to have a read through the article and then pick out any mistakes you find with grammar. So that could include subject-verb agreement, tense, or just generally in terms of the word order that we've talked about not being quite right. So can you correct those errors? So have a read through, pause it obviously when you're on the article. You can either jot down, or if you've got a screen highlighter you can use that. And then on the next slide I'll show you the model answer. So here's the first article with the mistakes. In the model answer there are 25 words changed in total, so that just gives you an idea of how many changes you might be looking to make. So if you pause at this point and then restart when you're ready. Okay, let's have a look at the model answer. So we've changed the word were, so it now is were taken. So if we look back, it was a mother and baby was taken, and it should have been were taken because it's and it's plural. After the car they were travelling in, and again are travelling in was in this form, which obviously that's a tense mistake because we know it's already happened, so it should be in the past. Next one is the pair were taken. The pair was take. So again, were to match pair, but taken should be the correct ending to that. Into the town came to an abrupt halt. Camed obviously is not a correct word. The woman was turning left. So were would be if it was plural, but because it's just one woman, that should be the was. Leon was caught. They had is caught, which again is present tense. We know it's already happened. Staffordshire Police and West Midlands Ambulance attended. So it's a plural, so it should be attended. And attends, obviously that's not past tense, again it's happened. With both occupants taken to hospital. Took obviously is present, but in the past you change it to taken. It is believed, believes. So again, it is and believes don't match in terms of the tense as well. A spokesman told the Mail. Tell, again, wrong tense. We were. we was, so we was is never correct. Officers found, officers finds, again wrong tense. The pair were taken instead of takes, again tense is wrong. The bollard was damaged instead of were, because bollard is single, so it should go with was. Staff were alerted. Staff are alert, so alert's again wrong tense. We did attend the incident, not attends, attend. Were taken instead of was took. And because that's a plural, it's an and. And believed and left, let's have a look at those. Believe, again we need to put it in the past. And leaves, again, wrong tense. Installed, install, so again we need past because that happened a long time ago. Have and caught, has and catched. Catched is not a word at all, and has, because it's drivers, that should be have. So well done if you spotted all of those mistakes. I don't think there's anything else, but you may well have perhaps reworded something to improve how it sounded, but it perhaps wasn't an actual error in the first place. So hopefully you did well on that one. I want to take you through a little bit of examiner analysis now. So we're going to see an example of a student's work, and we're going to see where the examiner has highlighted mistakes. You can see the number of grammatical mistakes that have been highlighted. So we're just going to focus on some of the pieces here. So we're looking, this blue bit is where they've talked about to informal language. That wouldn't come under grammar. This one would. I'm writing this report to let you know about the problems they causing. So what's happened here is that the writer's probably been too quick and missed the word they are causing. So that's a grammatical mistake where something's been missed out. This green bit means that this line wasn't very clear. So that's not really a grammar mistake, that comes under clarity. And the noise people make leaving is too much. Now this one's a bit of a grey area. If you watch the spelling video, I talked a little bit about homophones. So homophones are words like there, two, and two. So it's a bit tricky for examiners to decide sometimes whether to count mistakes with them as spelling mistakes or grammatical mistakes. Now for the Edexcel test, it doesn't actually matter, does it, if you think about the fact that spelling and grammar are lumped together for the marking. So let's not worry too much about it, but just to note that you should always be using the correct words, so the correct to. So this person should have used the double O to. Again, they said the language here, too informal, too much for people to take is informal. All of them is complaining. Because it's all, that should be are. That's a grammatical mistake. All of them, they said it was too informal. Awake, so that is identified as a spelling error because it should be one word. A lot is a spelling error because there's no such word as a lot. You can say a lot as two separate words, but as one word it doesn't exist. And grammar, they found another homophone mistake. That should be there, T-H-E-I-R. Another bit of problem with language here. Would you like it if you was living here? A bit informal. Punctuation there at the end because they've asked a question. And if you were living here, it should say instead of was. So sort of quite a few mistakes with that one line there. What you can't do is knock down the same thing twice. So they're all separate mistakes there. One's spelling, one's grammar. Sorry, one's punctuation, one's grammar, one's language. Another punctuation here with it should have an apostrophe. Spelling, a long time should be two words in this context. They have lived here a long time, and was here, because it's they, that should be were here long before the pub was. Pub be allowed. Now, this examiner hasn't been very consistent because they've marked this allowed as a spelling mistake, this homophone, but yet the other homophones they've marked as grammar. So I think the examiner hasn't been very consistent with their marking. Let's look at the end of this text. So we're looking for the clarity here. What we want is for the pub to be allowed to stay open so late. Doesn't make sense. Language, they've given the mark for there. Not very clear. And there's a bit of a punctuation mistake somewhere. And this should be residents be able to go to sleep and not be disturbed. She needs the ED on the end, that's grammatical. Informal again here. Around should be one word. This one they've put under spelling as well. I think they've got confused with through and through. So again, examiner ought to decide which one they're marking for. Grammar for there. So spelling for through, but grammar for there, a bit inconsistent on the ground, and makes the place look disgusting. That should be make, because it goes with people. People make the place. And disgusting, a spelling error. They've put a punctuation mark there because there should be a comma after before. Their lives, that should be EIR. That's why it's grammar against a homophone mistake. And spelling with sincerely. So you can just see how the examiners go through and they look for these kind of mistakes and they pick them out of a piece of writing. So this piece of writing unfortunately didn't pass for the test that this person was doing. So that's a quick look at grammar. My suggestions would be to read your work back carefully. This links back to proofreading, as I mentioned in the spelling video. If you read the words out loud to yourself, so almost mouth them to yourself, you're likely to pick up on anything that doesn't sound quite right. If, like me, sometimes when you go back you make changes, if you change a word in a sentence, check the rest of the sentence to make sure it hasn't affected the tense or the subject-verb agreement. Do think about the tense you're writing in. And if English isn't your first language, then unfortunately you need to do a bit more work here. You need to spend time looking at articles in particular and practice using them correctly when you're speaking. Because if you get used to using them all the time in the correct way, when you're writing it will come much more easily to you. So that's grammar. Good luck with your writing exam and getting all of those grammar marks.